This week marks the 75th anniversary of the official end of the Second World War, when Japan signed its deed of unconditional surrender. It ended 6 years of global conflict, the deadliest in human history, which claimed the lives of over 80 million people and changed the lives of hundreds of millions of others. This week, some of our colleagues at BBC News are relating their own family's experience in contributing to the People's War effort. And we're starting with my paternal grandfather, John Daniel Edwards, a merchant seaman risking his life with thousands of others in the Atlantic convoys.
The story begins in the tiny seaside village of Llanddewi Aberarth on the coastline of Ceredigion. This is where I'd come to visit my grandparents, and this is the little house where they lived. Nothing much has changed in the main street. And you can see the house in the background to this family photo, which was taken after the war and my grandfather's return after 4 years away. He'd gone to sea in the first instance at the age of 14 in 1920. It was the natural thing to do for the boys in the village.
But as he told me, many years later, never could he have imagined that that first voyage as a merchant seaman would lead eventually to 3 years in a German prisoner of war camp.
This is a story of the men who braved the dangers of the sea to bring us our daily bread.
The men of the Merchant Navy faced terrifying danger as they kept Britain supplied with food and raw materials. All too often, they were easy targets for the German battleships and U-boats.
To get on a ship voyage after voyage, knowing potentially what might happen, and realising it might be your last voyage, and some of the things they must have seen as well, even if it was other ships being sunk, those men are heroes.
In early 1941, my grandfather was working on the SS Stanpark. They had picked up supplies at Cape Town, and they were heading home when they met with disaster off the coast of West Africa. The convoy had been spotted by a German battleship called the Admiral Scheer. My grandfather's ship was sunk, and he and the crew were taken back to Bordeaux in France before being sent on to a prisoner of war camp in Germany. And this is the site of that camp at Sandbostel, and I'm the first member of my family to retrace some of his steps.
I've been waiting, I suppose, 40 years to see this, since I first was aware of my grandfather's story. So to come here today and to see where he spent a part of his life, a very difficult part of his life, is, I have to say, it's quite overwhelming.
I was shown around by the local historian and guide Ines de Rolf, who explained the layout of the camp to me.
These huts were meant to be like 250 prisoners of war in each hut. And then 4 huts had to use 1 latrine. So, when some of the prisoners of war were here, those huts were highly overcrowded.
So how many do you think would have been in there at that time?
Nearly 400.
Wow.
In fact, more than 300,000 prisoners of 55 nationalities were held here during the war.
This is an example for a hut from the first generation of huts here.
So when my grandfather came here, it would have been in a very similar building to this, but just a few meters away.
After a period at Sandbostel, my grandfather and his fellow prisoners were marched some 15 miles away to a place called Vestertimke, where they built another camp called Milag Nord. But all that remains of that camp today is this memorial to the 5,000 merchant seamen who were held here.
How many of them would stop at this memorial, do you think?
But that's not the only memorial to the Merchant Navy, of course, the most prominent of which is here in Greenwich, a reminder of the dangers the men faced.
You've a 50% chance of not making it at these peak points in the conflict, and conditions would be poor, your pay was poor, and your recognition was also not up there with the armed forces.
Without the Merchant Navy, we could not have won World War II. It's as simple as that.
My grandfather did make it home to West Wales before the end of the war, and despite fragile health, he lived to the age of 85. Always modest, always hard-working, and always grateful.
In a rare comment on his difficult wartime experience, he said simply this: "I was very lucky." And he always thought of the tens of thousands of merchant seamen who did not return,
but who made such a vital contribution to Britain's survival in the Second World War.